People ask me sometimes why I still drive out to Millhaven Road every January. 25 miles of two-lane blacktop in the kind of cold that turns your windshield white while you're stopped at a light. They ask like it's a hardship. Like I'm paying some old debt I owe. I tell them they've got it backwards. I was 12 the winter the county came for my grandfather. His name was Elroy Casson. 74 years old, hands like two catcher's mitts, a man so quiet he'd answer a direct question with a sound, a low hum, a soft exhale, and somehow you always understood exactly what he meant. He'd raised me in that house on Millhaven Road after my mother left, and I'd grown up thinking the whole world was that house. 6 rooms. A porch that sagged at the left corner. A barn he didn't use for anything anymore except to keep dry the one thing he never talked about, which I'll get to. We didn't have much. He'd worked the foundry in Carver's Crossing for 31 years and retired on what that bought you, which in southern Illinois in those days bought you a paid-off house and not a great deal else. He grew a garden. He kept the gutters clean. He drove a truck the color of old blood and he never once complained about the color. The notice arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because he'd made oatmeal, which was a Tuesday thing, and he set the envelope next to the bowl without opening it and ate his whole breakfast first. That was Elroy. Everything in its order. Then he opened it. I watched his face. It didn't change, not exactly, but something behind his eyes went still in a way I recognized from the one time I'd seen him get genuinely scared, which was the winter I had pneumonia at age 7. Not panic. The stillness before panic, when a man is deciding whether the thing in front of him is real. It was a condemnation notice. Property at 4114 Millhaven Road, Casson, structural deficiencies identified. 30 days to vacate or face county-enforced removal. Signed by a deputy zoning compliance officer named Garrett Phelps. The house had been standing since 1948 and it would outlast most of the men who worked in that county office. We both knew that. What we also knew, because Carver's Crossing was a small enough town that you knew things like this, was that a developer named Cresswell had been buying up the land along the eastern road for 2 years, and that 4 properties between the highway and the edge of town had already received condemnation notices, and that 2 of those 4 had already been sold at a loss to a holding company with Cresswell's name on the deed. Elroy set the notice back on the table. He hummed. Then he put on his coat and drove to the county office, and I didn't see him again until supper time. He came home with his face arranged into the expression he used when he didn't want me to know something was wrong, which meant I knew immediately. He'd been told the notice was final. That an appeal could be filed, but that the timeline was 30 days, and that the county's structural assessment, done, he would later find out, by a company Cresswell's holding group had contracted, was not subject to independent review. 30 days. I lay in bed that night and I thought about every room in that house. The water stain on my ceiling shaped like a boot. The drawer in the kitchen that stuck unless you lifted the handle at exactly the right angle. The way the heat came up through the floor grate in the morning and how, if you stood over it, the warmth went all the way through you. I thought about where we would go. And then I thought about the barn. I hadn't been in the barn since I was 9, when I'd gone in looking for a rake and found, under a canvas tarp in the far corner, a motorcycle. Not any motorcycle, a big one, black and chrome, with a leather saddlebag and, across the tank, a sticker that had faded but that you could still make out if you looked. 3 letters inside a diamond shape. I'd asked Elroy about it that evening and he'd said, in his way, that it wasn't ours to look at, and that was the end of it. I was 12 now. I understood a thing or two more about the world. I knew the Iron Covenant chapter hall was on the far end of Route 9, about 4 miles from the house. I'd ridden past it 100 times on my bike and never thought much of it beyond the flag and the 2 Harleys usually parked outside. Big men, leather vests, patches on the back. The kind of men that a 12-year-old from Millhaven Road gave a wide berth to out of pure instinct. But I was 12, and my grandfather was going to lose his house, and I was out of ideas. I left before he was awake. 4 miles in January. The cold came through my jacket like it had a grievance. By the time I got to Route 9 I couldn't feel my ears and the knuckles on my left hand had gone a color I'd never seen on skin before. I walked the bike up to the hall door and knocked. The man who answered was enormous. Beard like a blackberry thicket. A patch on his chest that said Road Captain, which I did not know the significance of yet. I told him what I'd come to say. I said, "My grandfather is Elroy Casson. He lives at 4114 Millhaven Road and the county is trying to take his house." I said, "I know he saved one of yours. January of 1999. He found a man on the county road, hurt and cold, and he brought him home and he kept him there 3 days and he never told anybody and he never asked for a single thing back." The road captain looked at me for a long time. He said, "How do you know that?" I said, "I found the bike." He looked at me for another long time. Then he opened the door wider and told me to come in out of the cold. There were 7 men inside. They all stopped talking when I walked in. A wood stove in the corner and the smell of coffee and motor oil and something else, something close and human, like a house where people actually lived. I sat in a chair someone pulled out for me and I put my frozen hands around a mug I didn't ask for and the road captain went to a metal filing cabinet against the back wall. He was in there for maybe 3 minutes. He came back with an envelope. I'll tell you what was in it, because it was read to us later and I've had 25 years to memorize the words. It was a letter from a man named Danny Farrell, who had been the Iron Covenant's road captain before the men currently wearing that patch. He'd written it in the spring of 2001, 2 years after the January night he'd gone down on ice on County Road 4 with a broken collarbone and a core temperature that, his own words, should have killed him before morning. He wrote that a man named Elroy Casson had dragged him off that road and into his house and kept him warm for 3 days without asking his name, without calling anyone, without taking a dollar. He wrote that he'd asked Elroy why, on the 3rd morning, and Elroy had said, because it was cold. Danny Farrell had died of a heart attack in August of 2001, 5 months after he wrote the letter. At the bottom of the letter, in handwriting that pressed harder into the page as it went, he wrote, "If Elroy Casson ever needs anything in this world, you ride. You ride like you're riding for me." The road captain put the letter back in the envelope and he looked at the other 6 men in the room and he did not say a word. He didn't need to. I don't know exactly what happened in the next 18 hours because I was 12 and they sent me home with a man named Carl who rode me back to Millhaven Road in a pickup truck and told me on the way that my grandfather was going to be all right. He said it like it was already a fact, not a hope, and I believed him because of the way he said it, flat and certain, the way you'd state the temperature. Elroy was on the porch when we pulled up. He looked at me. He looked at Carl. He looked at me again. I said, "I went to the hall on Route 9. He said nothing for a long time. Then he sat down in his porch chair, the one with the cracked armrest, and he put his hands on his knees and he looked out at the road and I couldn't read his face at all. Carl said, "Brother Farrell left instructions." Elroy closed his eyes. By noon the next day there were 11 bikes on Millhaven Road. By 2 o'clock there were 30. By the time the sun started going down, a man from the county assessor's office drove out to check on something and turned around without getting out of his car, because there was nowhere to go. The road in front of 4114 was a solid wall of motorcycles going back so far you couldn't see the end of them from the porch, and none of the men standing beside those motorcycles looked like they were planning to leave. 211 riders. From 3 chapters, from as far as 7 states over. Men who had never met my grandfather. Men who were there because Danny Farrell had pressed hard into a page 25 years ago and said, "You ride." I heard later, much later, when I was old enough to understand these things, that Garrett Phelps resigned from the county zoning office within a week. That Cresswell's development proposal for the Eastern Road quietly dissolved the following spring. That no other properties along Millhaven received a condemnation notice after that. What I saw with my own eyes was this. The club president came to our porch on the evening of that second day. He was a man with white in his beard and a way of moving that made everything around him feel calm. He sat in the chair across from Elroy and he read Danny Farrell's letter out loud, all of it, while I stood in the doorway. Elroy listened with his hands flat on his thighs and his eyes on the floor. When the president finished, Elroy was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that has weight. Then he said, very low, "Danny made it home that night. That's all I ever needed to know." And the president said, "He made it. And he never forgot." That was the only time in my life I ever saw my grandfather cry. Not a collapse, nothing like that. Just 2 lines, one down each cheek, quick and silent, like he'd been holding them for 25 years and had finally been given permission. I backed into the house. That felt like something a man deserves to have in private. The bike stayed through the night. In the morning they were gone, every one of them, and the road looked like it always had, just a two-lane county road with frozen grass on either side and the mailbox at the end of the drive with the flag still up. But the notice was gone too. And the house was still standing. And Elroy made oatmeal, because it was a Tuesday. He never talked about Danny Farrell directly. Not once, in all the years we had left together. But every January, when the cold settled in the way it does in southern Illinois, that particular white, heavy cold, he'd go out to the barn in the evening and I'd hear him in there for a while, and when he came back and he'd smell like motor oil and cold air, and he'd sit in his chair with his coffee, and whatever was on his face in those moments was between him and Danny Farrell, and I left it there. I inherited the house when Elroy passed. I still live in it. 6 rooms. The porch still sags at the left corner and I've never fixed it because I keep meaning to and then I don't. Every January I drive out Millhaven Road in the early morning and I sit in the chair with the cracked armrest and I drink coffee in the cold and I think about a man who dragged a stranger off a frozen road and asked nothing in return. Not a thank you. Not a debt. Just, because it was cold. The bikes come every year too. Not 211, just a few, quiet, a slow pass down the road, engines down low. They never stop. They don't need to. They just come by, so I know the debt is still carried, 25 years on, the same way Elroy carried it, without a word, without a flag, without asking for a thing. That's what it means to owe someone you can never repay. You ride.